Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing nikenwidiartto. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Probably not. nikenwidiartto in the 15-minute pool on ICC. I'm going to go French in this one. This is an opening I have not played. Well, maybe I played it once. Can't recall. Oh, knight f3. Knight f3 is kind of a lame move. I could play c5 and take it into a Sicilian. Or do I stick in French territory? Let's go into a Sicilian. Just because he made that invitation, I'm going to try to take this into like a Khan Sicilian, maybe a Taimanov. Could play c3, so now we're in an Alpin variation, or the c3 Sicilian. Here, knight f6 I think is the best move. Knight f6 or d5. b6 is also kind of interesting. This move is probably not quite sound, but I think for a 15-minute rapid game it's okay. So I'm going to play it. And after d4, I'm just going to put my bishop on b7. This is the whole point. So, well, I went into this with the intention of playing a French and thought I was going to get into an open Sicilian, and now we're in a c3 Sicilian. So that's how transpositions go sometimes. So yeah, if d4, I'll play bishop b7. The reason why after d4 I will not take on d4 yet is because if I capture on d4 and he takes with the c-pawn, and then I play bishop b7, he has knight c3, and he has very easy development thereafter, protecting the pawn on e4. So I hope to be able to avoid that by playing bishop b7. So this is similar to another weapon I use against the c3 Sicilian, which is for move 1, if e4, c5, c3, I'll play b6. I think it's a little bit better in that version compared to this version. Knight a3 is very strange. I mean, that move just makes a strange impression in general. I mean, I guess I'll just continue bishop b7 as normal. So I'm curious how he'll defend the e-pawn. Usually with knight a3, I mean, they're trying to go to b5 or c2. That is a move that comes up in the c3 Sicilian, although I have a hard time believing it's any good in this line. Bishop d3. So he's playing it like a Kopek Sicilian. He's going to put the bishop on c2. Well, I would doubt if this position has been reached before. If someone with a database wants to confirm that, please feel free. So usually when they play bishop d3, their plan is to go bishop c2 and then d4. So I can play knight f6 and attack the pawn on e4, or I can play knight e7. Knight e7 and trying to bring the knight to g6 is kind of interesting. But knight f6 has the benefit of immediately attacking that pawn, and also after knight d5, maybe I can sneak in knight f4. There's also d5 too. d5 is a pretty direct way of just tackling this entire setup of whites. Oh man, now I'm having even crazy ideas like g5. g5 trying to go g4. That would be wild. That would be super cool though. g5. No, that can't be a serious move, can it? Doubtful. So I'm thinking knight f6 or d5. Maybe knight e7. Knight f6 is would be a very standard move, I'd say. Knight f6, e5, knight d5. Bishop e4 might be... Well, bishop e4 I have knight takes c3. It's a rich position, this one. d5 seems a bit pedestrian, so I'm going to avoid that. Also, I want to keep the diagonal open for my bishop. Knight f6, on the other hand, is a move I think I can get behind. I also really want to go g5, but g5 should come with a health warning. Okay, let's play knight f6. Seems like the best move. So he'll play either e5 or maybe queen e2. Plays queen e2. Okay. So bishop e7 now. Probably what I'm going to go for. Yeah, let's just go bishop e7. Simple development. Maybe now his plan of going bishop c2 and d4, if that was indeed his plan, maybe that's hampered now because of bishop a6 possibilities. I do have to respect the threat of e5, though. Like, if I castle here and he plays e5 and I go knight d5, is queen e4 a problem? Maybe not. Maybe it's fine for me if he does that. but it should be on my radar. I could just play d6 in this position. Or d5 once again. d6, bishop c2. Castles keeps more options open. I think I'll play d6. I think this is probably the safest move. Because I figure if castles, I might have to play d6 soon anyways, unless I want to play for d5. It's hard to know. I mean, these positions are difficult to get your bearings in, right? Because it's completely unfamiliar territory. I played this line before, like a permutation of this line, but never with a setup remotely resembling this. Knight a3 and queen e2 and bishop d3. Those are like three things that are already somewhat unusual in my opinion. Okay, I'm just going to castle. If d4, I'll play around with the idea of bishop a6. I'll probably castle, or capture first on d4 if he plays it. You know what I also might do is if d4, c takes d4, c takes d4, I might play d5. Might do a little about face in my strategy and play d5. Trying to induce him to play e5 so I can sink my knight into e4. Because bishop a6, I think he's going to play knight b5, is what he's arguing. So I'm not sure how great bishop a6 is anymore. I'll just take. I might go d5. That seems promising. I do like the look of that move. Could also play knight c6. Bishop a6, knight b5 doesn't seem to yield much. What about queen d7? No. Yeah, I think I like d5. Let's do that. See if I can force him to a decision with the e-pawn. e5, knight e4. Something to that effect. Yeah. Go knight e4. So if he captures and I take, then he moves his knight, his d-pawn will hang. So he has to figure out an alternative way to deal with this piece. If he goes knight d2 to try to get rid of it, I think knight c6 is a good reply, threatening his pawn on d4. Well, there's a momentary lull. Let's just take a look at his stats. 15-minute rating of 1999. Peak rating of 2070. All of the ratings right around that. Right around 2000. Bishop e3 makes sense. So bishop e3, I could play bishop takes a3, b takes a3, bishop a6 if I want. That would compel him to play bishop d3, and then I could trade, and arguably I have a better pawn structure there. I do somewhat worry that my knight might get stranded on that square. It's the only thing. What other moves make sense here? Just knight c6 is fine. I hate to chop that knight because it is a pretty poor piece on a3 at the moment. But maybe chopping that knight's not a bad idea. I could also just play queen d7 here too. Queen d7 would actually threaten bishop a6. Bishop takes a3. Somehow I'm drawn to bishop takes a3. I mean, it's an appealing move structure-wise. Just destroys the structure. And then, we're in more of like a French-type position now than anything else. And in the French, you want to try to get rid of your light square bishop if possible. So that's why the bishop a6 idea is a nice one for black. So bishop takes a3, b takes a3, bishop a6, bishop d3. Let's say I trade and then maybe play queen d7 or maybe just knight c6. I'm worried that he might move this knight and then try to play for f3. But that's hard to do for him. That's not so easy to achieve. I'm going to do that. That's a forcing line that I think gets me a pretty good position, so I'm going to do this. At the very least, his structure will be compromised for the rest of the game. I'd love to get the queens off. the board in addition to what I'm doing here. That would be a dream scenario. So, like, it crosses my mind to play after bishop d3, the move queen c8, trying to induce a trade and get the queen to a6, but I think that's a little bit slow, and you can put a rook on c1. So I think I'll just keep it simple and trade and then develop, like knight c6. c4 is a great outpost for my knight, for my queenside knight. So maybe I'll head there if possible. Okay, so we'll take... I had knight c3, but it didn't do any damage, so... okay, so if knight c6, my plan is if he goes knight e1, I always have the g5 square as a escape route. I mean, I'd actually probably have to play h6, so I could even go back to h7 thereafter. But I'm going to play knight c6. I don't see a reason not to. He can put a rook on c1 to attack this undefended knight. This is an undefended piece, so I should be heads up about that. But if rook c1, I'll have knight a5 or maybe queen d7. Yeah, actually probably queen d7 is better. Knight d2, okay, that's interesting. I think that move is a strategic error, because after this I'm going to get a good knight versus fairly ineffective bishop, I would say, that type of position. So, do I want to trade or do I want to play f5? I think just trading is good. He's going to take with his bishop and try to cover the a5 square. But still, this is nice for me. So queen d7 I'm thinking about. Yeah, let's go queen d7. There's a nice trick. If he goes queen b5 trying to pin me, I have knight takes e5, exploiting his undefended queen. So he has to be heads up about that. Queen d7 is just nice because it makes way for my rook to come to c8, one of the rooks. I might want this rook on f8 in order to play f6, but more than likely the c-file is going to be where the action's at in this position. So I'm anticipating possible exchanges there. So with that move, what is he telling us? Rook a d1. I mean, he's saying he wants to keep this rook here, maybe in hopes of pushing the f-pawn. It's possible, I suppose. I'd really love to get my knight to c4. That's tough to do now, but that's the goal. Rook a c8. Transferring this knight to the king side, like knight e7 and put it on f5 is kind of nice. His bishop, albeit a passive piece, is doing a good job of monitoring a5. I think I like rook fc8 in this position. I'm leery about moving a rook away from the king, just because I don't have a lot of pieces in that vicinity then. But my fear with rook a c8 is that after like f4, knight e7, he has a move like bishop e4. Just trying to trade. Yeah, I'm going to go rook fc8. And my plan is to go knight e7 and try to get some magic happening down the c-file. Like queen a4 and try to come into c2, or maybe queen c6, but probably queen a4 if I can. I think he's going to have to make a decision very soon if he wants to just flat out attack me or not. Like some brute force approach with like f4 followed by g4 and then go f5. Something like that. It's probably the key test of my strategy right now. The only reason I use the f rook to go to c8 instead of the a rook is to cut out the bishop b4 pin on my rook on f8. That's the only reason. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been so keen to do this. Okay, let's go knight e7 as planned. Down on time, so I got to play a little faster. So queen a4 is coming up. If he goes bishop b4 now, what will I do? Probably knight f5. He's g4 though. Knight h4. My knight's going to get chased around. If bishop here, I might just play a5 or even rook c4. But then he gets to accomplish the goal that he set out to achieve, which is to destroy my knight. Actually, probably bishop b4 is not a bad move for him. I could go knight g6. I fear my knight might be restricted on that square. So bishop b4, knight g6, g4. My counterplay is a little bit slow. Okay, so he plays g4, but I can go queen a4 now if I want. I probably will. Yeah, let's do queen a4. Again, I'm trying to induce a queen trade. If I can come to c4 and make him trade with me, then that endgame is just so nice for black. He won't do that, though. He'll probably play queen e3 or queen f3. If he plays f5 now, I have to decide whether I'll play queen c2 or queen c4. I like c4 because it keeps an eye on the d4 pawn. But c2 actually attacks f5. So that'll be a mildly difficult decision. Plays rook c1. Okay, so he's going to try to fight me on the file. Rook c4 makes sense. So he's not going all out with f5. He's trying to fight me on the file. I could just take on c1, and if he takes with the rook, play rook c8. Try to trade. I have an advantage in that position still, I think, but it seems more to the point to play a move like rook c4 here. That just seems like a better idea. Yeah, let's play rook c4. I think this makes a bit more sense. And if he takes, which I'm anticipating because I am attacking d4, if he takes, I think either capture is decent. Not even sure which way I'll take. Probably with the pawn. Do I want to give him an excuse to play queen f3 with tempo on my rook on a8, though? Because then f5 is coming immediately after I address that threat. Yeah, he's just kind of responding to the threats. He's not creating threats of his own necessarily. I think that's an incorrect way of playing. If I were him, I would have been more aggressive with the f5 move. That's the only move that truly scares me in this position. f5, I mean, he's delayed it for a little bit now, and it's going to be harder for him to pull off. He can still play it, mind you, but like now there's mass exchanges that are possible down the file, which I probably will partake in right now. So if I just trade, get all the... Yeah, let's just get all the rooks off the board first. If I trade all the rooks, I can play queen c4. And that resulting endgame is nice if he trades queens with me. Yeah, it's a really nice position if he does that. I think there's a good chance he'll take with the bishop, actually. Because I think he realizes he should keep at least one pair of rooks on board. So if bishop takes, I can play queen c2 or queen c4, that choice I had earlier. Slight preference for queen c2. Then if queen f3, what would I do? Maybe take on f5, g takes f5, knight takes f5? That is possible. Yeah, okay, so that's my tentative plan. Let's see if he gives us an opportunity. Nearly caught up to him on time. He opts to go for this. Okay, I'm a little surprised by that. So now, I don't see any tactical opportunities I have. One line that is interesting is e takes f5, f takes e5, g takes f5. But I can't play knight takes f5 because of queen takes f5, and if I go... Well, actually, maybe I could do that. I was going to go check and then take the bishop, and I was worried about a back rank mate. But that leads to a queen ending. I'm not so sure about that one. I'm going to play queen c4 instead. And I'm going to try to win with like knight versus bishop in the endgame if he trades queens with me. So this puts him to a very tough decision. Because if he doesn't trade queens, then his position is so fragile. And he's got pawn weaknesses galore. But if he does trade queens, like I get the d5 square for my knight. That's just such a beautiful square, and he still has to tend to his pawns, like his f5 pawn. He'll probably have to trade on e6. I think the position is going to be extremely difficult for him to handle or hold there. I'll just pre-move that capture. I think that's probably what he'll do. I do wonder last move if I could have taken on f5 twice. That might have been possible. But, you know, it probably wasn't worth considering. There's other moves too I might have had, like knight c6 to attack d4. This queen c4 move is so thematic though, and I was considering it in so many lines. It's almost begging to be played. I predict he'll trade and then take on e6 and then try to bring his king up. At least that's what I would do if I were him. But I get my knight settled into d5, and then at that point knight c3 becomes a threat with the a2 pawn. I mean, honestly, my plan here is to probably just march in with my king. Like king f7, e8, d7, c6, b5, a4. Do something like that. Yep, he does go for this exchange. I'll pre-move that. Ooh, okay, he didn't do that capture. So if I take, he takes knight d5, he's going to support the pawn somehow. What if knight d5, he takes g7, and I play knight c3? Isn't that very good for me? Kind of looks like it. Take. Yeah, I could just take on f6 first and then do that plan. Yeah, actually, that looks simpler. Let's do that. And then play knight d5. And if g5, I think knight c3 is very good. Then I won't have to waste time like recapturing the pawn on g7. So let's think here. So g5, knight c3. Let's say he gets his king a little bit closer. King f2, knight takes a2. I'm going to do this move. So king f2, knight takes a2. Let's say bishop f4. c3. Yeah, he's actually not even in time to stop the pawn, is he? c3, king e2, c2. And if king d2, I just queen. Yeah, okay, so actually I'm going to win a piece, I think. And I don't think he can like trap my knight in the resulting position. That doesn't seem possible. So I think I got everything taken care of. I don't want to get too excited, but yeah, I mean, just the simple threat of taking on a2 and then running the c-pawn is hard for him to handle. Yeah, he's going to get his king closer. I think I can just take. Yeah, and wherever the bishop goes, c3. And him bringing the king to e1 when he gets a chance doesn't help either. So c3, king e1, c2, yeah, it's just a dilemma for him. It's a piece. Yeah, I can do this. The only thing that could mess me up is if my king or my knight somehow gets trapped, but I don't see how that would happen. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Too many escape squares. E2, B3, A2. He can't cover them all. Yeah, plays H4. think I'll probably just queen. Just checking if there's a reason to play like h5 or something like that. h5 is actually kind of a nice move. Maybe I will do that. Just to put a stop to his pawn, sure. There's no rush here. We'll be accurate. And he places king up, okay.
Check.
Yeah, king over. I think I'll just go here and attack his pawn on d4. Also maybe like residual plan, go after his h-pawn. Yeah, it's too much. I can play a6 and keep his king out if I want, or I could just play king h7 is a good move. Yeah, let's just go king h7. If king b5, I take d4 with check, so it's no big deal. Yep, he recaptures. I could go knight c3 and then take here. But I think I'll just play king g6 just for safekeeping. Everything defended. Now after king c6, probably knight c3 is the simplest. Yeah, just go after that pawn on a4. And he resigned. Okay, so we'll have a look. Now, for a game that started off as a French, but then morphed into a Sicilian, it actually ended up looking more like a French. So it came full circle. I said knight f3 was kind of a boring move because if I play d5, it gives them the option of just going into the exchange French with knight f3 already played. I actually don't think he would have done that. I think he would have done something funkier just based on how he played it. I think he probably would have played e5 or something. But c5 is a good move because I play the Sicilian for black, the con Sicilian, and this is a direct transposition to that if they play d4. So yeah, as I said after c3, I think knight f6 or d5 is probably the theoretical recommendation in this position. But b6 is interesting. And as I was saying, if they go d4, I don't want to take on d4. I'd rather play bishop b7 and hit the pawn and win the tempo first. Because if I take on d4 and then play bishop b7, they have knight c3, and it's very seamless for them. They just defend e4 easily. So I don't want to allow that. So he played knight a3, which is definitely unusual. Bishop b7, bishop d3. And as I said, there's a line called the Kopek system where white does this. Where they play bishop d3 and then drop the bishop back to c2 with aspirations of playing d4, but he didn't really do that. Well, he did, but it took a while. He played queen e2, bishop e7. Yeah, I was considering some radical stuff, but I'm pretty happy about how I played it in retrospect. Yeah, so he did play d4. It just took a little while. He took, and then I went for d5. So this might be the first position that I'm truly interested what the engine will say. Yeah, the engine likes d5. Bishop a6, although nice in that it attacks the queen and has the rook behind it skewering, it is just met by this simple knight b5 move. And I can't further exploit this pin. If I go queen d7, I mean a4 is good enough. Even if he had to accept double isolated pawns, he'd be more than happy to do that when my knight can't be developed and he gets pressure on a7. So I think this was pretty decent. d5, e5, knight e4. He went here, and okay, the engine likes how I played it. Bishop takes a3, pawn takes a3, bishop a6. So I get rid of my light square bishop. I get to remove his good bishop, his light square bishop, and leave him with his bad one, his dark square bishop. And kind of simplify the position, too. So knight c6. So one thing I had to keep in mind with this knight on e4, it's not like just a dominating knight. I mean, he does have this f-pawn move that he could make. So pawn f3 at some point to try to trap it, but that would entail having to move the knight away, like knight here. And then his idea would be like f3, knight g5, and h4 would be the follow-up. to trap that piece. But fortunately, I can play moves like h6 if I want to, so that after f3 and here I can go back to h7 if need be. Also, I see the computer's recommending f6, which makes a good deal of sense too. Just attack e5. So then if f3 in here, we have that square available for defense. So I did kind of sense that this would be okay if he played a move like knight e1. So he went knight d2. I think this is a strategic error. I mean, I know my knight is a beast, but I still don't like that move. I would rather try to play around that knight and not get into like a bad bishop versus good knight scenario. Although to his credit, he is restricting my knight. Like, my knight did have troubles fully activating itself. Can't get to a5 and then into c4 easily. Yeah, rook f c8. Okay, the engine likes this move. And again, the reason why I didn't play rook a c8 is because of, let's say if f4 and I go knight e7, he has bishop b4. I didn't like the fact that I'd be at his mercy as to whether he wants to exchange that bishop for the knight. Because that was like my pride and joy, right? The fact that I have a good knight versus his bad bishop. So the game worked out very nicely for that concept because I won with the good knight. So that's why I played rook f c8. I mean, when I played that move, though, I know I was taking some risks on the king side. I have no defenders around my king. I have no pieces at all from the e file through the h file. It's just my king and my pawns. Fortunately, he's not in like a great position to attack me yet, so I think it's okay. Yeah, knight e7, I just did this to stall the f5 advance. Then g4, queen a4. Yeah, so I think this is a hard scenario for him. Just turn off the engine for a second. But this is the type of scenario that really like tests what you're made of in a position, right? Like, he knows, or he must sense, that strategically his position is not good. And in the long run, black has a lot of strategic trumps, the better pawn structure, control of the super crucial c-file, the good knight versus the bad bishop. So when your position is statically worse like that, you have to compensate by playing aggressively and dynamically. So that's why I don't really think like a half measure like rook c1 will do in this position. I think he had to go for f5. And that's the move that he's been setting out to play. And he delayed it for a few moves, and it really cost him because I was able to get coordinated. So he should play f5 when my rook is still stuck on a8, when I don't have such a clearly good way to play down the file quite yet. And even delaying this move by a tempo or two could have disastrous implications. So I already saw that the engine preferred this f5 move. I kind of cheated right before I turned off the engine here. But yeah, the engine agrees f5 should be played. And I was thinking mainly queen c2 or queen c4. I wasn't quite sure which one to play. Let's say we follow the engine suggestion, queen c4. I thought he had to play a move like probably queen e3, just to keep defending d4. And you see, it's not so clear. I mean, it gives a small edge to black, but that's nothing in this position. This position's getting sharp. Yeah, maybe queen c4 is not even the best move. Let's say queen c2. Queen c2, I thought he would go queen f3, because I am attacking f5 3 times now, so he needs to defend that. Ah, queen e4, okay. Did I see that move? I might have. Can't recall, but yeah, queen e4. So black could continue badgering white and trying to trade queens. Yeah, that's a nice move, and then it hits d4 too, and if he goes queen f2, trying to avoid the queen trade and guard d4, then g4 is hanging with check. So yeah, there's a couple ways I could have kept this on. I would like to think I would have found queen c2, but you never know. Regardless, I think he has to play f5 here. So I was very happy to see the move rook c1. Like, that's almost like affording my attack too much credit. I mean, he's kind of admitting like, okay, you know, you got me. I was flirting with the idea of attacking on the king side, but I'm going to admit that your threats are much more real. So that builds my confidence. Yeah, and then bishop e3, he had to waste time defending the d-pawn. I thought he should take here, so that after d takes c4, he could play queen f3 with tempo on my rook. Again, I see the engine thinks black's doing well. Knight d5 here. Ah, okay, and queen d7, that's a nice move. That keeps everything defended. But still, I mean, compared to the game, he has much more chances in a messy position like this, even if objectively he's a lot worse. He's got to look for his chances. His chances do not lie in an endgame here. They lie in a complicated, messy middle game where we're both approaching time pressure. And I was able to trade. Again, I thought even like maybe bishop takes c1 was better, keep a little bit more tension.
Check.
Okay, so the computer thinks I should take. Now, one line I mentioned was knight takes f5, queen takes f5, queen
Check.
d1 check. Ah, but he has queen f1. Okay, I totally didn't see queen f1. I was looking at like king g2 and then take. Originally, I rejected this whole line because I thought he had queen c8 mate, but well, it's not a diagonal line. Queen c8 mate, but my queen does cover that square. But yeah, queen f1 would have been a rude awakening if I had actually gone for this position. I see the computer still thinks that white is fine, but or black is fine. Have enough pawns for it, but still. No, I like queen c4. I would play this move again, I think. It's just such a nice move. And if he avoids the queen trade, his position's collapsing. Like I take him f5, and I just win a pawn. So he's compelled to trade queens, and then my knight gets this beautiful d5 outpost. I still have a better pawn structure. I have a passed pawn now, too. And he has some issues he has to resolve with the f-pawn. I thought he would take here, and then bring his king up. But, yeah, I mean, this is still a pretty big threat. Bishop d2, yeah, and now maybe I start bringing my king up and trying to walk it in, trying to attack. He has very, very little counterplay. I mean, he has no inroads he can make. Even if he gets his king up to e4, I mean, what's it going to do against this blockaded knight? So I don't know if black's winning here. I think I could probably win this in practice. At the very least, it's going to be a nightmare for white to defend. But, yeah, maybe he had to do that. f6 was a little too time-consuming. I trade and play knight d5. And when he attends to the f-pawn, yeah, I'm getting in here, and my c-pawn is irresistible. Yeah, and this was over shortly. You know, even in a position like this, I know I'm winning, but I like h5 because who knows? Like maybe in the event of
Check.
something like this, just say I go knight d3. Like maybe h5 and the threat of g6 is annoying. So even though he can take en passant after h5, that's fine. Like I can. That actually probably helps me because it breaks up his pawns, and I can play king h7. And after a subsequent queening, his pawns will be very easy to pick off. So just trying to be accurate up to the end. There's no harm in that.
Check.
And suppressing counterplay. His last bit of counterplay is if he can run his king in and somehow win both pawns and get a past a pawn. And
check.
I was just wary of that. So, okay, that was an interesting strategic game. And, you know, if I were to criticize like one major decision or pick out like one turning point in this game, it would be white's decision to take a half measure here with rook c1. I think they had to just barrel ahead with f5. I don't think you can afford to take a timeout and play rook c1 because you're never going to be able to gain much by disputing me on the c file. At best, that's like a break-even proposition for white. And at worst, you're going to end up in a static position with reduced material where you're still worse. So, at any rate, very interesting game against nikenwidiartto. And if you know of a game that reached this position, I'd love to see it because I don't think this position has been reached before. So, all right, well, thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow with another standard game. Feel free to leave me your feedback in the comments. Talk to you later, guys.